Pack your bags and clear out of the master bedroom by this weekend. Trevor and I need the space for baby number 7. And make sure you wire $15,000 for our new minivan by Tuesday. The old one just will not fit us all anymore. My younger sister Chloe licked the barbecue sauce off her fingers, delivering this demand as if I were her personal bank. I calmly wiped my mouth, pushed my plate away, and smiled. I am not paying a single dime, and that room is mine. 10 minutes later, police sirens were wailing down our street. Chloe had called them to have me thrown out of our ancestral family home. She had no idea those officers were about to hand her a reality check that would shatter her entire world. Before I reveal the secret that destroyed her entitlement, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic family member a lesson they will never forget. The Sunday cookout was a sacred tradition in our family, a time when generations gathered to share food and stories. The scent of hickory smoke and grilled brisket drifted over the sprawling backyard of the ancestral home my grandparents had built decades ago. Dozens of aunts, uncles, and cousins were clustered on the lawn, their paper plates loaded with potato salad and collard greens. I sat quietly at the edge of the brick patio, nursing a glass of iced tea, completely exhausted from a 70-hour workweek managing my real estate development firm. I just wanted one peaceful afternoon to rest my mind. But peace was never an option when my 29-year-old sister Chloe and her husband Trevor were around. Chloe stood up from her lawn chair, tapping a plastic fork against her cup to silence the music. She placed a hand over her slightly rounded stomach and beamed at the crowd. Everyone, Trevor and I have a huge announcement. We are expecting baby number 7. A chorus of cheers and polite applause erupted from our relatives. My mother Loretta threw her hands toward the sky, praising the Lord loudly for yet another blessing. I offered a tight, polite smile, though internally I was calculating the absolute financial disaster this represented. Neither Chloe nor Trevor had held a steady job in 4 years, yet they continued bringing children into the world with zero plan to support them. Trevor, a 34-year-old white man who carried himself with an unearned sense of superiority, swaggered over to where I was sitting. He wore a stained athletic shirt and took a long pull from his cheap beer before looking down at me. He walked around our family property like an overseer, completely blind to his own incompetence. "So Maya," he said, his voice carrying over the fading applause, "with the new baby coming, things are going to get tight. We need you to pack up your things and move down to the unfinished basement by Friday. Chloe and I are taking the master bedroom." I stared at him, my iced tea suspended halfway to my mouth. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Trevor continued, entirely too comfortable giving orders to a woman who actually worked for a living. "And we did the math. A new minivan is going to run us about 40 grand. We expect you to chip in 15,000. Consider it an investment in your nieces and nephews. It is your duty as a successful aunt to support our beautiful biracial family, especially since you do not have any real responsibilities of your own." The sheer audacity of his demand hung heavily in the humid summer air. For years I had watched this man use his proximity to my black family as a shield for his failures, acting as if blessing us with his presence meant we owed him our hard-earned paychecks. I set my glass down on the patio table. The ice clinked sharply against the glass. "I am not moving out of the master bedroom, Trevor, and I am certainly not handing you $15,000 for a car you cannot even afford to gas up." The background music had completely stopped now. The ambient chatter of the cookout died away, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence across the yard. My mother Loretta pushed her way to the front of the crowd. In our family, the matriarch's word was law, and Loretta wielded her authority like a weapon. She planted her hands on her hips, fixing me with a harsh glare that used to terrify me when I was a child. "Maya, how dare you speak to your brother-in-law that way?" she snapped. "You are 32 years old, single and childless. What on earth do you need a master suite for? You sleep in it alone. You are hoarding space and hoarding money while your sister is actively building a legacy." I looked at my mother, feeling the familiar, deep-seated sting of her judgment. To Loretta, a woman's worth was entirely tied to her ability to produce children and keep a man, regardless of how completely useless that man might be. "Mom, I work day and night to build my business and secure my future," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I am not an ATM for Chloe's constantly expanding household. Loretta stepped closer, pointing a rigid accusatory finger right at my face. You are a selfish, bitter woman. Family takes care of family. I sacrificed my life savings to put you through college so you could sit in your fancy office. The least you can do is help your sister raise these innocent babies. The lie was so blatant, so deeply ingrained in her personal mythology, that I actually laughed out loud. It was a sharp, humorless sound that made Trevor take a nervous step back. You sacrificed your life savings for my college, I repeated, standing up slowly to meet her hostile gaze. Mom, my tuition was covered by a full academic scholarship, every single penny. I worked overnight shifts to pay for my own books. Do you want to know what you actually spent your life savings on? Loretta's eyes widened, a sudden flash of panic breaking through her righteous anger. Maya, stop right now. No, we are doing this today, I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent yard for all our cousins and aunts to hear. You drained your retirement account last year to post a $50,000 bail for Trevor after he got arrested for aggravated assault outside a sports bar. You mortgaged your own future for a man who refuses to work, and now you want me to fund his lifestyle. Trevor's face flushed a deep, ugly red. You listen to me, you arrogant witch, he snarled, stepping directly into my personal space, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. You owe this family everything. You live under this roof, you eat at this table, and you will do exactly what you are told. If you do not transfer that money by tomorrow morning, I will personally throw your designer bags onto the street. Chloe chimed in, crossing her arms smugly over her chest. You are just jealous because no man wants you. Pay up, Maya, or get out of our house. Our house. The phrase rolled off her tongue so easily. They had been living in this delusion for so long, insulated by my mother's, enabling, and their own toxic entitlement. I looked at the three of them, my mother, my sister, and her husband, all glaring at me with identical expressions of greedy expectation. They thought they had me completely cornered. They thought I was the same quiet, compliant girl who used to swallow their cruel insults just to keep the peace. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or cry. Instead, I calmly reached into my black leather tote bag, resting on the chair beside me. My fingers closed around the thick, heavy leather-bound folder I had prepared exactly for this moment. I pulled it out and dropped it onto the patio table with a resounding thud. Let us talk about who owes who, I said softly. The heavy thud of the leather-bound folder hitting the patio table sent a visible shockwave through the yard. I kept my hand resting flat against the cover, feeling the eyes of every aunt, uncle, and cousin burning into my skin. The humid summer air suddenly felt freezing. I looked directly at Trevor, who was still puffing his chest out, trying to maintain his artificial dominance, and then at my sister Chloe, who had suddenly stopped chewing her food. $42,317. I announced, my voice carrying clear and steady over the whispering crowd. That is exactly what I have contributed to your expanding household over the past 4 years. I flipped open the heavy cover. The first page was a meticulously highlighted spreadsheet backed by bank-certified printouts. I turned to my sister, who was now looking everywhere but at me. Should we go through the line items right here in front of the whole family? Let us see. $8,000 for emergency room visits because Trevor refused to fill out the state health insurance paperwork for the kids. $12,000 in direct payments to the Sunshine Daycare Center so you two could stay home and supposedly find yourselves while I was working 70-hour weeks. Another $20,000 in grocery deliveries, winter coats, diapers, baby formula, and utility bills that I paid, so the power would not get shut off on my nieces and nephews in the middle of December. A collective gasp rippled through the older relatives gathered on the lawn. My Aunt Vivian covered her mouth, her eyes darting between me and Trevor in absolute shock. Trevor shifted his weight, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson as his facade of the hard-working provider dissolved in front of the entire family. For years he had walked around our family cookouts drinking our beer and acting like he was doing us a favor by marrying a black woman while secretly surviving on my paycheck. I am done, I declared, closing the folder with a sharp final snap. As of this morning, I have canceled every auto draft, closed the shared credit lines, and instructed my bank to decline any future requests from your accounts. You want the master bedroom. You can pay for it yourself. You want a new minivan? Go fill out a job application. The free ride ends today. My mother pushed her away to the front of the patio, her face contorted with a mix of deep embarrassment and explosive rage. Loretta could not stand losing control of the narrative, especially not in front of her siblings and the church friends she had invited over. She relied on projecting the image of a flawless, supportive matriarch. "How dare you embarrass your family like this?" Loretta screamed, her voice shrill and trembling with fury. "You think having a little bit of corporate money makes you better than us? You think you can just look down on your own blood? I gave you everything. I emptied my entire life savings account to put you through that fancy university, so you could sit in your glass office and act like you are superior to the people who raised you." I looked at my mother, feeling a profound sense of clarity, replacing the years of conditioned guilt. "You really believe your own lies, do you not?" I took a step toward her, refusing to break eye contact or back down. "I went to college on a full academic scholarship, Mom. Every single tuition bill was covered by my own hard work and my own grades. I worked overnight shifts at a customer service call center just to pay for my own textbooks and meals. You did not give me a single dime for my education." Loretta opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my voice just enough to cut her off, turning to face the rest of the yard. I wanted to ensure my words reached the relatives who had judged me for years based on my mother's fabricated stories. "Do you all want to know where Loretta's life savings actually went?" I asked the crowd. "She drained her entire retirement account 2 years ago to post a $50,000 cash bail for Trevor. He got arrested for aggravated assault outside a downtown sports bar, and she mortgaged her own financial future to keep her precious white son-in-law out of a jail cell. She gave him my college fund, and she has been forcing me to fund his lifestyle ever since, to hide her terrible financial mistakes." The yard erupted into frantic, loud whispers. Aunt Vivian shook her head in sheer disgust. Uncle Marcus, who had personally lent Loretta money last year under the guise of medical bills, glared at Trevor with pure, unadulterated contempt. Trevor puffed out his chest, taking an aggressive step forward toward me with his fists balled up, but Uncle Marcus and two of my older cousins immediately stepped onto the patio, forming a solid physical barrier between us. Chloe realized the entire family was turning against them. The golden child narrative she had coasted on her entire life was burning to ashes, and the reality of her parasitic lifestyle was exposed for everyone to see. She let out a piercing, guttural scream of absolute frustration. Her hands grabbed the edge of the heavy patio table. With a violent, chaotic heave, she flipped the entire table backward. Bowls of potato salad, massive plates of barbecue ribs, and heavy glass pitchers of sweet tea crashed onto the brick patio, shattering into hundreds of jagged pieces and splattering everyone nearby. Food and broken glass covered the ground, but Chloe did not care about the mess she had just made of our family gathering. She stumbled backward, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged malice. She ripped her smartphone from her maternity jeans pocket and frantically dialed 911. She put the phone to her ear and immediately forced hysterical, sobbing tears into her voice, transforming instantly from an aggressor into a terrified victim. "Help me, please, you have to send someone immediately," she cried into the receiver using a fragile, trembling tone I had never heard her use before. "There is an aggressive woman trespassing on our property. She is completely out of control, smashing glass everywhere and threatening my husband. Please hurry. I am pregnant and I am terrified she is going to hurt my biracial children." Chloe locked eyes with me as she spoke those deeply calculated, dangerous words to the dispatcher, a wicked, triumphant smirk breaking through her fake tears. She knew exactly what she was doing by painting an independent black woman as an aggressive threat to law enforcement, assuming she could use the police as her personal weapon to force me out. She had no idea the trap she had just set for herself. The wail of police sirens pierced the thick summer air, long before the red and blue flashing lights painted the sides of the neighboring houses. Chloe remained on the ground, clutching her pregnant belly, forcing out loud, theatrical sobs that echoed across the lawn. The rest of the family stood frozen among the ruined barbecue ribs and shattered glass. No one moved to correct the lie. My own mother, Loretta, simply crossed her arms and watched, tacitly approving of this performance. She was willing to let her own daughter be arrested just to protect her precious white son-in-law and maintain the illusion of her matriarchal control. The heavy tires of two police cruisers crunched onto the gravel driveway. Doors slammed shut. Two uniformed officers, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other older with a stern expression, marched briskly toward the backyard. Their hands rested cautiously on their utility belts, scanning the messy scene. Trevor immediately sprang into action. He wiped the furious red flush from his face, instantly replacing his aggressive scowl with the calm, composed demeanor of a concerned father and protective husband. He jogged toward the officers, intercepting them before they could even assess the scene. He knew exactly how to play this game. He knew that his white skin and steady voice would grant him instant credibility, a privilege he weaponized without a second thought. "Officers, thank God you are here," Trevor said, keeping his hands visible and his tone respectful. He gestured toward Chloe, who wailed louder right on cue. "That is my wife. She is pregnant with our 7th child. We were having a peaceful family cookout when her sister—" He pointed a rigid finger directly at me, showed up completely unhinged. "She started screaming about money, making wild threats against my kids, and then she violently destroyed our food table." Trevor sighed, running a hand through his hair, projecting the image of an exhausted, reasonable man dealing with a maniac. "She does not live here. She is trespassing on my family property. I asked her to leave peacefully, but she refused and became hostile. We are terrified she might do something drastic to our babies." The older officer nodded sympathetically at Trevor, absorbing every fabricated word as absolute truth. He patted Trevor on the shoulder, murmuring a reassurance before turning his gaze toward me. The younger officer knelt beside Chloe, asking if she needed an ambulance. Chloe shook her head weakly, burying her face in her hands. "I just want her gone," Chloe sobbed. "I just want my babies to be safe in their own home." The older officer approached the patio, his boots crunching over the broken glass. His posture was rigid, his eyes locked onto me with intense scrutiny. "Ma, I need you to step off the porch right now and keep your hands where I can see them," he commanded, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. The atmosphere in the yard shifted from shocked silence to palpable tension. My Aunt Vivian gasped softly, clutching her chest. Uncle Marcus looked away, unwilling to intervene against the police. Loretta stood tall, a grim look of satisfaction settling on her wrinkled face. She fully expected to see me humiliated, dragged away in handcuffs, finally punished for daring to challenge her golden child and the son-in-law she had sacrificed everything to protect. Trevor stood behind the officers, a smug, victorious smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully used the system to break me, proving once and for all that he was the master of this house and I was just the disobedient help. I looked at the officers. I felt the sharp, dangerous reality of the situation. I was a black woman standing in a tense scene, surrounded by broken glass, with law enforcement treating me as the primary threat. One wrong move, one raised voice, and this could end in a deadly tragedy. But I felt no fear. I felt nothing but a cold, calculated sense of purpose. I did not raise my hands in surrender. I did not step off the porch. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight, my expression completely neutral. "Ma," the officer barked, stepping closer, his hand shifting deliberately toward his handcuffs. "I gave you a lawful order. Step off the property immediately, or you will be placed under arrest for trespassing and property damage. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Trevor crossed his arms, whispering loudly enough for the surrounding relatives to hear. "Just cuff her, officer. She is clearly not in her right mind. We want to press full charges immediately." I maintained direct eye contact with the lead officer. "Officer, I appreciate you responding so quickly to a disturbance call," I said, my voice smooth, steady, and utterly devoid of panic. My calm demeanor caused him to hesitate for a fraction of a second. "However, I will not be stepping off this porch, and I will certainly not be leaving this property." The officer frowned, his patience evaporating. "This is your final warning," he growled, stepping up onto the brick patio, closing the distance between us. "You are trespassing on this family land." I reached into my leather tote bag with slow, deliberate, and highly visible movements. The officer tensed, ready to draw his weapon, but stopped when my hand emerged holding nothing but a thick sealed manila envelope. "I am not trespassing," I stated, clearly extending my arm to hand the envelope directly to the officer. Trevor laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "What is that?" "Fake bank statements. You cannot buy your way out of an arrest, Maya." I ignored Trevor completely, keeping my eyes locked on the confused policeman. "Before you make the monumental mistake of wrongfully arresting someone based on a fabricated story, I highly suggest you open that envelope, officer. Read the documents inside. Read the names very carefully, because once you do, you will realize exactly who is trespassing on whose land today." The older officer took the heavy manila envelope from my outstretched hand. His eyes darted between me and Trevor, who was already scoffing loudly, claiming I had printed out fake internet forms to save myself. The officer ignored him, breaking the seal and sliding out the crisp, watermarked pages. The heavy embossed stamp of the county clerk caught the afternoon sunlight. I watched the officer's eyes scan the first page, tracking his changing expression as he processed the official property deed and the most recent paid-in-full property tax records. All of it was filed legally under my corporate entity, Maya Heritage Holdings, LLC. I kept my posture completely relaxed. I bought this property in cash 4 years ago when it was 24 hours away from public foreclosure auction. I explained, my voice carrying over the silent yard. The bank was coming to lock the doors. I saved it, put it in my company name, and allowed my mother, my sister, and her husband to stay here as month-to-month tenants without ever charging them a single dime in rent. Trevor does not own the grass he is standing on. He does not own the driveway where he parked his unpaid car. He is merely a guest on my land, and as of this moment he is a very unwelcome one. The older officer flipped to the second page, then to the copy of my state identification that I had conveniently clipped to the back. He let out a long, heavy exhale and handed the papers back to me with a newfound look of respect. The younger officer, who had been kneeling next to Chloe, stood up and took a deliberate step away from her. Chloe stopped her fake sobbing instantly, her mouth hanging open as she realized her performance had just hit a brick wall. Trevor lunged forward, pointing frantically at the documents in my hand. "That is a lie," he shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "She is lying to you. My mother-in-law owns this house. Tell them, Loretta. Tell them this is our family home." Loretta stood frozen by the shattered patio table. She looked at the police officers, then at the dozens of relatives staring at her with wide eyes. The truth she had kept hidden to protect her matriarchal pride was finally out. She had nearly lost our ancestral home due to her own financial mismanagement, a secret she had guarded with her life, and I had been the one to secretly rescue it with my corporate wealth. She could not speak. She simply looked down at the broken glass, her silence confirming every word I had just said. Cousins who had previously judged me for being unmarried and childless were now staring at me with a mixture of awe and intimidation. The power dynamic of the entire family had shifted in an instant. The older officer turned to Trevor, his previous sympathetic demeanor completely gone. His hand rested firmly on his belt. "Sir, I highly suggest you lower your voice and step back." The officer warned, his tone sharp and uncompromising. "This woman is the legal property owner. You are the tenant. You called us out here on an emergency dispatch claiming a violent trespasser was threatening your pregnant wife. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense. I could arrest you right now for wasting city resources and lying to dispatch." Trevor shrank back, his arrogant posture crumbling under the threat of actual legal consequences. He looked around the yard seeking support, but our family members were physically backing away from him. Aunt Vivian was shaking her head in pure disgust, whispering a prayer under her breath. The neighbors next door had come out to their fence lines, phones in hand, watching the white man who always bragged about his property get publicly dressed down by the police on the lawn he did not even own. Loretta shrank into herself, utterly humiliated, as the community watched her golden child and favorite son-in-law get exposed as total frauds. The entire neighborhood now knew that the grand matriarch of the family was living under my charity. The officers informed me I had the right to demand Trevor leave the premises immediately. I looked at my sister, who was still sitting on the grass looking pathetic and entirely defeated. I could have had them thrown out into the street that very second. But I was a businesswoman, and I handled my affairs strictly by the book. I wanted this done legally cleanly, and with absolute finality, leaving them no room to claim they were victimized or unfairly targeted by the police. "Officers, I appreciate your time," I said smoothly. "I will not press charges for the false report today. However, since you are here, I would appreciate it if you could stand by for just one more moment to serve as official witnesses." I reached back into my leather tote bag. The yard was so quiet you could hear the breeze rustling the old oak trees. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. It was not a heat-of-the-moment decision. It was a formal, legally binding document I had drafted the moment Trevor had demanded $15,000 from me earlier that morning. I walked down the porch steps, my heels clicking deliberately on the pavement, and stopped directly in front of Trevor and Chloe. I held out the paper. Trevor stared at it like it was a live explosive. "This is a formal 30-day eviction notice," I announced, ensuring the officers and the entire family heard every single syllable. "You have exactly 1 month to pack your luxury bags, gather your children, and vacate my property. If you are not entirely off these premises by midnight on the 30th day, I will have the sheriff's department physically remove you and everything you own." Chloe burst into genuine panic-stricken tears, realizing the free ride was actually definitively over. She grabbed Trevor's arm, shaking him, begging him to do something. Trevor snatched the paper from my hand, crumpling the edge in his fist. His eyes were dark, filled with a desperate, venomous hatred. He leaned in close to my face, his breath hot and reeking of cheap beer. "You think you have won because you have a piece of paper?" he sneered, his voice dropping to a vicious, threatening whisper that only I could hear. "You just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life. You care so much about your little real estate empire. Enjoy it tonight, Maya. Because by tomorrow morning, I promise you, I will make sure every partner, every investor, and every contractor you work with knows exactly what kind of heartless woman you really are. I will burn your business to the ground, and you will be the one begging us for a place to stay." I stared into his desperate, hateful eyes, completely unbothered by his empty promises, and simply walked away, leaving him standing on my lawn with his crumpled eviction notice. But Trevor did not waste a single second. By 6 in the morning on Monday, my phone was vibrating off my nightstand. I reached over, squinting at the screen, and found dozens of missed calls, urgent text messages, and a flood of social media notifications. Trevor had made good on his threat, but he and Chloe had coordinated their attack with a level of viciousness that even I had not fully anticipated. They had weaponized the very community they constantly took for granted. Opening my local community app, I saw my own face plastered across the screen. Chloe had uploaded a heavily edited, tearful video of herself rubbing her pregnant belly standing in front of my house. She painted a picture of absolute devastation, completely omitting the $42,000 I had spent raising her children. Instead, she spun a narrative of a ruthless corporate landlord's sister who was throwing a helpless pregnant mother onto the street. Trevor, ever the opportunist, had taken it a step further. He had logged into every local African American community Facebook group and our church's online bulletin board, writing lengthy, inflammatory posts. He branded me a race traitor and a gentrifier who cared more about corporate profits than her own blood. He claimed I was evicting a pregnant black woman and his biracial children just to sell the ancestral family home to wealthy white developers. The hypocrisy of a jobless white man using black community spaces to incite outrage against a self-made black woman was staggering. But people love a victim, and Chloe played the role flawlessly. The comment sections were absolute war zones, filled with strangers calling for boycotts of my real estate firm and demanding I be exiled from the community. The real damage began when I stepped into my downtown office at 8 o'clock. The receptionist looked panicked, holding a stack of pink message slips. My business phone was ringing endlessly. As a developer specializing in revitalizing historic black neighborhoods without displacing the residents, my entire brand was built on community trust and ethical investment. Trevor knew exactly where to strike to hurt me the most. Before I even had time to set my briefcase down, my primary financial backer, Marcus Vance, called my direct line. Marcus was a highly respected community leader and the lead investor on a $10 million affordable housing project we were launching next month. Maya, what is going on over there? Marcus demanded, his voice thick with tension. My board is blowing up my phone with links to your sister's video. They are calling you a predatory landlord. You know our firm cannot be associated with anyone displacing pregnant mothers and children. We are facing a massive public relations disaster before we even break ground. If this is true, we have to pull our funding by the end of the day. I sat behind my desk, gripping the edge of the mahogany wood. I refused to let my panic show in my voice. Marcus, you have known me for 5 years, I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured and professional. Have I ever conducted business without absolute integrity? The people in that video are my sister and her husband, who have been living rent-free in my personal property for 4 years while bleeding me dry. They are trying to extort me because I finally cut off their financial supply. Give me until the end of the day to handle this. I will provide full documentation proving every single word I just said. Marcus exhaled sharply into the receiver, clearly conflicted but willing to rely on our professional history. You have until 5 o'clock, Maya. After that, my hands are tied. We cannot afford the optics of this scandal. I hung up the phone, my mind racing through crisis management protocols. I needed to issue a public statement, release the financial records, and sue Trevor for defamation. But before I could even draft an email to my corporate attorney, my personal cell phone rang. It was my mother, Loretta. I stared at her name flashing on the screen. After her humiliating exposure at the cookout, I expected her to maintain an angry, stubborn silence. Instead, when I answered the call, I heard the sound of heavy, breathless weeping. It was not the performative, angry yelling she usually employed when she wanted her way. It sounded like genuine despair. Maya, please do not hang up on me, Loretta cried, her voice cracking with heavy emotion. Please, baby, you have to listen to me. I am so sorry. Everything is falling apart and the whole neighborhood is talking about our family. The shame is going to kill me. I leaned back in my chair, narrowing my eyes. Mom, Chloe, and Trevor are the ones destroying the family name right now. They are actively trying to ruin my business with vicious lies. Tell them to take the post down, or my lawyers will do it for them. I cannot control them, Maya, Loretta sobbed loudly into the speaker. Trevor is out of his mind and Chloe is just following whatever he says. But we can fix this. We can stop all of this public mess. Pastor Thomas called me this morning. He saw the church message boards and he wants to help us heal. He offered to mediate a private prayer and healing intervention for the family. Just you, me, Chloe, Trevor, and the pastor. Right now in his private office at the church. Please, Maya, come to the church. If we sit down with the pastor, we can talk some sense into Trevor and get him to take down the videos. We can save the family before this goes any further. I listened to the desperation in my mother's pleas. I knew the culture of our church and I knew how deeply entrenched the pastor was in protecting the matriarchal hierarchy of his congregation. An intervention mediated by a man who had known Loretta for 30 years was not a negotiation. It was a spiritual ambush designed to guilt me into submission. It was a calculated trap to force me to drop the eviction and surrender my boundaries under the guise of religious duty and family forgiveness. But I also knew that dodging the meeting would only give Trevor more ammunition to claim. I was a heartless, unrepentant villain, avoiding accountability. I needed to crush this rebellion at the source, and I needed to do it on their home turf. I stood up from my executive desk, grabbing my car keys and my heavy leather folder filled with financial evidence. I will be at the church in 20 minutes, I said, coldly ending the call before she replied. I pulled into the parking lot of Greater Hope Fellowship. The brick building had been my family's spiritual home for 3 generations. I expected to walk into Pastor Thomas' private study for a closed-door meeting. Instead, the heavy oak doors to the main sanctuary were propped wide open. I stepped inside and immediately felt the trap spring shut around me. The sanctuary lights were blazing. Sitting in the front pew was my mother Loretta, flanked by several senior deacons and church elders. Chloe sat next to her, dabbing her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. Standing beside the pulpit, looking entirely too comfortable, was Trevor. Pastor Thomas stood at the center aisle holding his leather-bound Bible, looking down at me with an expression of profound disappointment. I tightened my grip on my heavy leather folder. They had turned my private family conflict into a public church tribunal. Sister Maya, the pastor, began, his voice echoing through the empty sanctuary. We are gathered here today because your family is in deep spiritual crisis. Your mother came to me weeping this morning. She told me about the eviction notice you served your own pregnant sister. The Bible teaches us to protect the vulnerable and honor our family, but you have chosen the path of greed over grace. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. Pastor Thomas, I respect you and this church, I said, keeping my voice level and calm. But my mother did not tell you the whole truth. She did not tell you that Trevor and Chloe have been living in my property rent-free for 4 years while I paid all their bills. Loretta shot up from the pew, pointing a trembling finger at me. Do not bring your worldly ledgers into the house of the Lord, Maya. You have been blessed with corporate wealth and you are hoarding it, while your sister is carrying a child. You are humiliating our family name in front of the entire congregation. The elders nodded in solemn agreement, murmuring their disapproval. They were completely blinded by Loretta's performance. Trevor stepped forward, walking down the altar steps with a thick stack of legal papers in his hand. He commanded the attention of the church elders, acting as the aggrieved protector of his family. We just want to heal this rift, Maya, Trevor said, using a sickeningly gentle tone. Chloe and I are willing to forgive your violent outburst yesterday. We are willing to take down the social media posts and tell the community it was just a misunderstanding. But we need to know you are truly committed to this family. Pastor Thomas stepped closer, blocking my path. Healing requires a demonstration of faith, Sister Maya. Trevor and Chloe have a practical solution. We believe you should legally transfer the management of your nieces and nephews' trust funds over to Trevor. He is the father. It is his rightful place to manage his family's finances. It will prove your loyalty and show you are ready to repent. I froze, completely paralyzed by the revelation. The sheer audacity of the demand hit me like a physical blow. The trust funds. I had set up 6 separate high-yield accounts for my nieces and nephews years ago to ensure those children would have college tuition when they turned 18. Trevor had absolutely no legal access to that money. Now he was using my mother and the pastor of my church to extort me. I looked at Loretta. She looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. She knew exactly what Trevor was doing, but she was so desperate to maintain her image and keep her white son-in-law happy that she was actively helping him rob her own grandchildren. Here she was bowing down to a jobless parasite. You brought me here to extort me, I said, my voice rising, echoing off the stained glass windows. You are using the church to steal from your own blood. Watch your mouth, Maya, the pastor warned, stepping forward aggressively. You are speaking to your elders. Trevor is the head of his household. You are an unmarried woman withholding resources that belong to his children. Sign the papers, and we can pray for your forgiveness. If you refuse, we will have no choice but to bring this matter before the entire congregation on Sunday. We will cast you out for turning your back on your own flesh and blood. Trevor smirked, holding a pen out toward me. Just sign it, Maya. You know you cannot win against the whole church. Give me control of the funds and we will leave you alone forever. I looked at the pen. I looked at the smug satisfaction on Trevor's face. I looked at Chloe, who had suddenly stopped pretending to cry and was staring greedily at the legal documents. They thought the threat of public excommunication would break me. They thought my fear of social isolation would force me to hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars to a man who refused to work a single day in his life. Instead of taking the pen, I smiled. I did not argue. I did not scream or defend myself against their baseless religious guilt. I turned my back on Pastor Thomas and walked right past Trevor. Where are you going? Loretta yelled, panic creeping back into her voice. Do not you dare walk away from your pastor. I marched straight up the carpeted steps of the altar, heading directly toward the modern audiovisual control deck the church used to project scripture and announcements during Sunday services. The massive projector screens hung silently above the choir loft. What is she doing? Trevor demanded, his smug demeanor faltering as he rushed toward the altar steps. I reached the control deck and pulled a small silver flash drive from my own pocket. I quickly plugged the small flash drive directly into the main system port. The instant the metal connector clicked into place, the massive dual projector screen suspended above the choir loft flickered to life. A blinding white light washed over the sanctuary, illuminating the shocked faces of the church elders and my mother. Pastor Thomas lunged forward, reaching to grab my wrist, but I smoothly stepped aside, my fingers flying across the control keyboard. I had spent years running multimedia presentations for multi-million-dollar real estate pitches. Navigating the outdated, audio-visual system of Greater Hope Fellowship took me less than 5 seconds. "What are you?" Trevor yelled, his heavy footsteps pounding against the carpeted altar stairs as he scrambled to stop me. "Turn that off right now." I ignored his panic and double-clicked the primary folder on my drive, instantly blown up to 15 feet tall and broadcast in crystal-clear high definition for the entire congregation to witness, were Trevor's highly confidential banking records. I had not hacked his accounts. I did not need to. As the primary guarantor on the emergency credit lines my mother had forced me to open for them years ago, I had full legal access to the transaction histories. I just never bothered to look closely until Trevor decided to threaten my livelihood. Trevor reached the control deck, his face completely drained of color. He lunged for the power cord, but two sturdy church deacons, recognizing the financial documents flashing on the screen, stepped into his path, blocking him. They wanted to see exactly what this unemployed man had been doing with the family money. "Let us talk about protecting the vulnerable," I announced, pulling the microphone from the podium stand so my voice boomed through the sanctuary speakers. "My mother brought me here today because Trevor and Chloe claimed they needed my money to feed their children. They claimed I was starving my own nieces and nephews." Take a very close look at the screen, Pastor Thomas. I highlighted a block of transactions from just last Tuesday. The bright yellow marker on the screen drew every eye in the room. $300 transferred to a Cayman Islands offshore sports betting syndicate. Another $500 deposited the following morning to the exact same account. A collective gasp swept through the sanctuary. The church elders, men who had just attempted to lecture me about greed and spiritual duty, stared at the screens in absolute horror. But I was not finished. I scrolled down to the previous month, bringing up a separate, highly categorized list of recurring charges. And here we have the money that was supposed to go toward baby formula and winter coats for my nieces and nephews. I said, my voice cold and precise. I highlighted a series of $200 charges repeating every single week. These payments were not going to a grocery store or a pediatrician. They were going to a premium OnlyFans account, under the name Sweet Peaches VIP. The silence that fell over the church was deafening. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that only occurs when a massive, shameful truth is laid bare in a place of worship. Uncle Marcus let out a low whistle that echoed through the room. The older women in the congregation began fanning themselves frantically, whispering fervent prayers. Trevor stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The righteous, commanding patriarch he had pretended to be just moments ago had completely vanished. He was exposed as a degenerate gambler and a serial philanderer who stole food from his own children's mouths to fund his digital infidelity. Chloe stared at the massive screen above the choir loft, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She looked at the offshore betting charges, then at the OnlyFans subscriptions, and finally, at Trevor. He raised his hands, shaking his head, stammering out a pathetic string of denials, claiming his identity had been stolen, claiming the bank statements were digitally altered. But Chloe knew better. She knew the dates, she knew the missing funds, and she knew the lies he had told her about working late on his imaginary startup company. But Chloe did not attack her husband. Years of conditioned jealousy and deep-seated resentment over my success had twisted her mind completely. Rather than holding the white man who was draining her dry accountable, she directed all of her explosive, blinding rage directly at the black woman who had just shattered her perfect illusion. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream that tore through the sanctuary. She sprinted up the altar steps, moving with terrifying speed for a pregnant woman. Before I could even brace myself, she lunged across the control deck and slapped me across the face with everything she had. The sharp, violent crack of her palm striking my cheek echoed through the microphone I was still holding. My head snapped to the side, my ear ringing loudly from the sheer force of the impact. The taste of copper flooded my mouth as my teeth cut into the inside of my cheek. Total pandemonium erupted in the house of the Lord. The church elders shouted, rushing the altar to pull a screaming thrashing. Chloe away from me. Pastor Thomas dropped his Bible, desperately yelling for order over the sound system. Down in the front pew, the ultimate consequence of this public humiliation finally took its toll. Loretta, the proud image-obsessed matriarch who had orchestrated this entire ambush, could not handle the crushing weight of the scandal. She clutched her chest, her eyes rolling back into her head, and collapsed hard onto the wooden pew, fainting dead away. Deacons yelled for someone to call an ambulance. Trevor tried to slip out the side door, but two large ushers grabbed him, dragging him backward. I stood my ground, wiping blood from my mouth. Then a sharp vibration pulsed against my wrist. I glanced down at my Apple Watch. An urgent silent security alert flashed. The reinforced door to my private real estate office breached. The sharp vibration against my wrist grounded me instantly. I wiped the fresh blood from my split lip and glanced down at the illuminated screen of my Apple Watch. An urgent silent security alert flashed in bright red letters. The reinforced door to my private real estate office downtown had just been breached. I did not waste another second looking at Chloe or the chaotic mess unfolding at the church altar. I turned on my heel and sprinted down the center aisle, pushing past the stunned deacons and throwing open the heavy oak doors. My car tires screeched against the asphalt as I sped out of the church parking lot. My mind raced, piecing together the timeline. Trevor had slipped out the side door moments before I projected his offshore banking records. He knew his financial lifeline was completely severed, and he knew Chloe would soon discover he had drained their accounts. Desperation makes parasites dangerous. He was going after the only tangible assets left to exploit: the original property deed to the ancestral home, and the hard copies of the Children's Trust Fund portfolios locked in my office safe. I pulled up to the rear alley of my commercial building. The back security door, made of heavy steel, had been aggressively pried open, the deadbolt completely shattered. I stepped inside quietly, my flat shoes making no sound against the polished concrete floor of the corridor. As I approached my private executive suite, the harsh, violent sound of metal striking metal echoed down the hallway. I rounded the corner and stood in the doorway. The scene inside my meticulously organized office was one of absolute destruction. My mahogany desk had been swept clear, documents and architectural blueprints scattered across the floor like garbage. Trevor was gripping a heavy steel crowbar, swinging it wildly against the locks of my fireproof filing cabinets. Chloe was right beside him, her tear-streaked face twisted in manic desperation as she ripped through the files Trevor had already managed to pry open. They were acting like common thieves, frantically tearing apart my livelihood to save themselves. "Where are the trust documents?" Chloe screamed, tossing a stack of urban development contracts over her shoulder. "She has to have the originals here. Find the deed to the house, Trevor. If we get the deed, we can force a transfer before the bank opens tomorrow." "You are looking in the wrong cabinet," I said, my voice cutting through the sounds of their vandalism like a blade. Trevor spun around so fast he nearly lost his footing. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and wide with the reckless panic of a cornered animal. He stared at me, his chest heaving, as he realized he had been caught red-handed. But instead of showing fear or remorse, his face contorted into an ugly, aggressive sneer. He dropped the crowbar. It hit the hardwood floor with a deafening clatter. He reached onto my ruined desk and picked up a solid brass paperweight, gripping it tightly in his right hand. Chloe gasped, stumbling backward against the wall, but she made no move to stop her husband. She watched him advance toward me, her silence making her entirely complicit in whatever violence he planned to inflict. "You just could not leave well enough alone, could you?" "Maya," Trevor growled, stepping slowly across the room, closing the distance between us. "You had to humiliate me in front of the entire congregation. You had to try and ruin my marriage. You ruined your own marriage the second you chose offshore sports bets and internet models over feeding your own children," I replied, refusing to take a single step back. "Put the paperweight down, Trevor. You are already facing breaking and entering. Do not add aggravated assault to your rap sheet. Trevor let out a dark, breathless laugh. He stepped closer, raising the heavy brass object just enough to make the threat explicit. He cornered me against the glass wall of the conference room, blocking my exit to the hallway. You think you are so smart. You think you hold all the cards because you have some corporate money. But you are just a bitter, lonely woman who wants to see my family suffer. He reached into his back pocket with his free hand and pulled out a folded legal document, aggressively shoving it against my chest. This is a power of attorney form. He spat, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper. You are going to sign this right now. You are going to sign over full management rights of those trust funds, and you are going to transfer the deed of the house into Chloe's name. If you do not sign it, I swear to God, Maya, I will make sure you never walk out of this office. I looked down at the crumpled document pressed against my chest, and then I looked directly into his eyes. My expression remained entirely neutral. I did not scream out for help. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not reach for the pen he was trying to force into my trembling hand. Trevor expected a terrified victim, but he was staring at a woman who anticipated every single move he could possibly make. You really should have paid more attention when you were casing my building, I told him, my tone conversational and remarkably calm. I slowly raised my hand and pointed a single finger over his left shoulder, directing his attention toward the dark corner of the ceiling. Trevor frowned, his arrogance momentarily faltering as he turned his head to look. Tucked discreetly behind the crown molding was a tiny cloud-synced 4K security camera. Its solid red light blinked steadily in the dim shadows of the room. It was transmitting every word, every threat, and every violent action directly to a secure off-site server. Trevor slowly lowered the heavy brass paperweight, the horrific realization finally washing over his very pale, sweating face. That light means everything happening in this room is already saved to an encrypted offshore server, I said, keeping my posture perfectly relaxed. Every smashed cabinet, every scattered blueprint, and that heavy brass paperweight you just threatened me with. But the camera is not the best part, Trevor. The best part is the silent panic alarm wired directly into the steel door you pried open with a crowbar. Trevor dropped the brass paperweight completely. It hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the ruined office. He whipped his head toward the hallway, his chest heaving as the distant wail of police sirens suddenly amplified, bouncing off the concrete walls of the commercial building. They were not passing by. They were pulling directly into the rear alleyway. You set us up! Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she backed away from the shattered filing cabinets. You knew we would come here. You trapped us. I did not force you to break into a commercial property, I replied coldly. I did not force your husband to pick up a weapon. You walked into this trap entirely on your own because your greed blinded you to basic common sense. Heavy tactical boots pounded down the corridor. Trevor spun around in a desperate, frantic circle looking for an exit that did not exist. He grabbed Chloe by the arm, trying to pull her toward the secondary fire escape door, but it was far too late. Police department, show me your hands right now. A booming voice echoed through the suite. 5 officers flooded into the executive office, their service weapons drawn and leveled directly at Trevor. Trevor immediately threw his hands into the air, his face completely devoid of color. Wait, this is just a misunderstanding, he stammered, automatically attempting to deploy his usual shield of privilege. I am a family member. We are just having a domestic dispute over some paperwork. Nobody needs to get hurt here. Get on the ground, face down, hands behind your back, the lead officer roared, completely ignoring Trevor's pathetic attempt to negotiate. The officer kicked the crowbar out of the way and moved in rapidly. Trevor dropped to his knees and then flat on his stomach. 2 officers pinned his arms behind him, the metal handcuffs clicking shut with a sharp, satisfying finality. Chloe backed against the glass wall of the conference room, her hands shielding her pregnant belly, sobbing hysterically. I am pregnant. Please do not touch me. I am pregnant, she wailed, as a female officer approached her with handcuffs ready. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Ma, the female officer instructed firmly, spinning Chloe around and securing her wrists. She owns the building, Trevor yelled from the floor, his cheek pressed against the hardwood. Ask her. Maya, tell them we are family. Tell them we have permission to be here. I looked down at the man who had just threatened my life. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer and turned to the lead officer. I am the owner of Maya Heritage Holdings, I stated clearly. These two individuals broke through my secured rear entrance, destroyed my corporate property, attempted to steal confidential financial documents, and threatened me with a weapon. I am pressing full charges for breaking and entering, property damage, and aggravated assault. You cannot do this to your own sister, Chloe screamed, struggling against the officer's grip as they began to march her toward the hallway. Mom is going to kill you for this. She will never forgive you. Mom is about to have her own problems, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone, pulling up the direct contact for my private wealth manager. I hit the call button and put the phone on speaker, ensuring Chloe and Trevor could hear every single word before they were dragged away. Good afternoon, Miss Williams, my wealth manager answered promptly. How can I assist you today? David, I need you to initiate an immediate total freeze on the secondary platinum accounts, I instructed, my eyes locked on Chloe's horrified face. Cancel the emergency line of credit attached to Loretta Williams and terminate the joint spending cards issued to Chloe and Trevor. Flag them all as unauthorized for any future transactions. Cut them off entirely, effective this exact second. Understood, Miss Williams. Consider those accounts permanently closed, David replied before I ended the call. You cannot do that, Chloe shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams. Mom uses that card for her medication. We use that card for gas. You are leaving us with nothing. You are starving your own family. I am protecting my assets from criminals. I corrected her, stepping closer so she could see the absolute zero tolerance in my eyes. Mom made her choice when she ambushed me at the church and allowed your husband to extort me. You made your choice when you broke into my business. You wanted independence so badly, Chloe. Now you have it. Enjoy paying for your own life. The officers hauled Trevor up from the floor. He glared at me, his eyes burning with a toxic, humiliated rage, but he kept his mouth shut, finally realizing that every word he spoke was digging him a deeper grave. They marched him out of the office suite, reading him his Miranda rights as his heavy boots dragged against the floor. Chloe fought the female officer every step of the way, crying and cursing my name as they guided her down the corridor and out into the bright afternoon sunlight of the back alley. Several employees from neighboring offices had stepped out to watch the commotion. Chloe was forced to endure the public shame of being shoved into the back of a police cruiser in front of a live audience. I followed the officers outside to provide my official statement. As the female officer gently but firmly pushed a sobbing Chloe into the back seat of the squad car, a loud, sharp ringing pierced the air. It was coming from the clear plastic evidence bag the officer had placed on the trunk of the cruiser, holding Chloe's confiscated personal belongings. The officer glanced at the ringing cell phone pressing against the plastic. "Ma, you are receiving a phone call," the officer stated neutrally. "Answer it!" Chloe begged frantically from the back seat, her face pressed against the protective mesh barrier. "It might be my mother. She needs to know I am being arrested. Put it on speaker. Please, you have to let me talk to her." The officer sighed, unzipping the evidence bag and pulling out the vibrating phone. She glanced at the caller identification screen, her brow furrowing slightly. "It is not your mother," the officer said, her tone shifting to something much more serious. The officer accepted the call and activated the speakerphone, holding it near the open back door of the cruiser so Chloe could hear. "Hello, is this Chloe Williams?" A stern, highly professional female voice echoed from the speaker. "Yes, this is Chloe." My sister sobbed, her voice muffled through the metal grate. "Who is this?" "This is Agent Davis with Child Protective Services," the voice announced instantly, draining whatever remaining color Chloe had left in her face. "I am currently standing on the front porch of your residence with an emergency police escort. We received an urgent anonymous report from one of your neighbors regarding severe child neglect. We need you to return to the premises immediately to grant us access to the children inside the home." The silence in the back of the squad car was heavy, broken only by the sharp, ragged intake of Chloe's panicked breathing. The female officer holding the phone locked eyes with me through the open door. I gave a single firm nod. The officer pressed the end call button, cutting off Agent Davis and leaving Chloe to drown in the reality of her own catastrophic negligence. "You did this!" Chloe shrieked, thrashing against the heavy plastic seats of the cruiser. Cruiser, you called them on me. Maya, you set my children up. I stepped right up to the window mesh, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. I was sitting in a church being ambushed by you and your husband for the last 2 hours. I did not have to call anyone. Chloe, you abandoned your own children to come rob my office. As the patrol car pulled away, heading straight for the ancestral property, the full picture of their reckless greed finally snapped into focus. While Trevor and Chloe were busy orchestrating their holy extortion at Greater Hope Fellowship, and while they were desperately swinging a crowbar at my filing cabinets, they had left 6 children ranging in age from a 1-year-old infant to a 10-year-old, completely unattended. They had locked the front door of my property and simply walked away, assuming the older siblings would parent the younger ones. But hungry children do not stay quiet. Just 45 minutes earlier, Mrs. Higgins, the elderly woman who lived in the property adjacent to mine, had been watering her hydrangeas when she heard the distinct, terrifying sound of glass shattering. Looking over the fence, she saw Chloe's 3-year-old son wandering aimlessly on the back deck, dangerously close to the steep concrete steps, wearing nothing but a soiled diaper. Inside the house, the 10-year-old was frantically trying to quiet the screaming twins. They had attempted to reach a high shelf to find a box of dry cereal, knocking over a heavy glass vase in the process. There was no adult supervision, no answered phone calls, and absolutely no food in the refrigerator. Mrs. Higgins did exactly what any responsible community member would do. She dialed emergency services. Now Chloe was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, handcuffed and facing multiple felony charges, watching her carefully constructed life disintegrate. The officers allowed her one phone call while en route to the property. Naturally, she called the only enabler she had left. "Mom, you have to help me." Chloe sobbed hysterically into the speakerphone, the officer holding the device near her face. "CPS is at the house." Maya froze the accounts. "Trevor is going to jail. You have to get down here and post bail for us right now. You need to hire a lawyer to stop them from taking my babies." Loretta's voice echoed through the squad car, high-pitched and frantic. "Hold on, baby. I am coming. I am pulling out the emergency platinum card right now. I will call Pastor Thomas, and we will get the bail bondsman on the line. I will not let them take my grandchildren." But Loretta's arrogant promises collided instantly with the brutal financial boundary I had just erected across town, standing in the church parking lot. My mother dialed the premier bail bondsman she had used for Trevor's previous assault charge. She rattled off the 16-digit number of her emergency credit line, fully expecting the transaction to clear. Declined. Loretta scoffed, blaming the connection, and pulled out a second card, the joint account she shared with Chloe. Declined. Panic seizing her chest, Loretta dialed the automated banking system. Punching in her social security number, the robotic voice on the other end delivered the final crushing blow. "Account frozen. Unauthorized user. Please contact the primary cardholder." My mother, the great matriarch who loved to boast about her financial savvy and control over the family, was standing in the sweltering heat with zero access to capital. She could not bail out her golden child. She could not hire a high-powered attorney. She did not even have enough active credit to order an Uber to drive her to the house. I had financially paralyzed them all in a single phone call. Back at the ancestral estate, the police cruisers pulled into the driveway. Agent Davis, a veteran social worker with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, escorted out of the vehicle, her wrists still bound behind her back. She wailed, begging Agent Davis to understand. It was all a huge misunderstanding, blaming me, blaming the church, blaming anyone but herself. Agent Davis ignored the theatrics. "We have already secured the children in our emergency transport vehicles," she stated coldly. "They are malnourished, dehydrated, and the infant has severe diaper rash. Now we are conducting a mandatory environmental safety inspection of this residence." Because Chloe was the current legal resident, the police unlocked the front door, using the keys confiscated from her pockets. Agent Davis stepped inside. The smell of sour milk and overflowing trash hit them immediately. The living room was a disaster zone of broken toys, sticky floors, and stained furniture. Agent Davis walked down the hallway to the rooms where the 6 children slept. She documented the horrifying reality of my sister's parenting. The kids were crammed into two small, poorly ventilated bedrooms. Their mattresses lay directly on the floor, lacking fitted sheets. The closets were completely empty, their few garments shoved into broken plastic laundry baskets. The adjoining bathroom was filthy, lacking basic hygiene supplies or clean towels. The kitchen pantry held nothing but a few boxes of stale pasta and empty liquor bottles. But the true horror, the detail that made even the seasoned police officers clench their jaws in disgust, was waiting at the end of the hall. Agent Davis approached the heavy solid oak doors of the master bedroom suite. The room Trevor had aggressively claimed for himself. The room they had demanded I vacate. The door was locked with a heavy-duty digital keypad, a stark contrast to the flimsy knobs on the children's rooms. "Open it," Agent Davis commanded, glaring at Chloe. Chloe shook her head frantically, her tears drying up as sheer panic took over. "No, that is our private space. You do not have a warrant for our bedroom." The police officer stepped forward. "Under exigent circumstances regarding child endangerment, and since you are currently under arrest for multiple felonies, we are entering this room. Give us the code or we break it down." Defeated, Chloe mumbled a 4-digit passcode. The heavy door clicked open. Agent Davis pushed it wide, stepping into a space that looked like it belonged in a completely different universe. The master suite was immaculate. The air conditioning was blasting, keeping the room perfectly chilled. A massive plush king-sized bed dominated the center of the room, draped in expensive high-thread count Egyptian cotton sheets. Against the far wall sat a state-of-the-art custom-built dual gaming computer setup, complete with curved monitors and ergonomic leather chairs that cost thousands of dollars. Agent Davis walked toward the massive walk-in closet and threw open the double doors. The contrast was absolutely nauseating. While the 6 children slept on bare soiled mattresses with no proper clothing, Trevor's side of the closet displayed a pristine, meticulously organized collection of over 40 pairs of limited edition luxury sneakers. Chloe's side was lined with authentic designer handbags, premium cosmetics, and rows of expensive maternity wear, with the price tags still attached. A miniature, fully stocked, luxury refrigerator sat in the corner of the room, packed with premium craft beers, imported sparkling waters, and expensive artisanal snacks, while the main kitchen fridge had literally nothing but tap water. Agent Davis pulled a digital camera from her jacket pocket, her expression hardening into absolute professional fury. The shutter clicked rapidly, capturing the sickening disparity. She photographed the tags still dangling from a row of Chloe's silk maternity dresses, followed by the towering stacks of Trevor's limited edition basketball shoes, each pair easily worth $500. The police officers stood in the doorway, exchanging disgusted looks. Agent Davis documented the high-end gaming console, the curved dual monitors, and the virtual reality headset carelessly tossed onto a leather recliner. She opened the miniature luxury refrigerator, snapping pictures of the imported IPAs, the organic charcuterie boards, and the artisanal chocolates. This was not a family struggling with poverty. This was a calculated, malicious choice to hoard resources while 6 children starved in the very next room. The officers began securing the area, taking notes for the child endangerment charges that were about to be heavily upgraded. Down the hall, the oldest child, an 11-year-old boy whose clothes hung loosely on his frail frame, watched the officers move through the house. Agent Davis knelt in front of him, her voice softening as she asked him when they had last eaten a proper meal. The boy looked at his bare feet, his shoulders trembling. He finally broke down the heavy burden of being a surrogate parent to 5 younger siblings, completely shattering his tough exterior. He sobbed, wiping tears from his sunken cheeks with the back of his hand. "Please do not give us back to him," he begged, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Trevor never feeds us. He just locks the door and plays his video games all day with his headphones on, so he does not have to hear the babies crying. If we knock on the door, he screams at us and calls us worthless." Agent Davis gently placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, encouraging him to keep speaking. The boy looked up, his eyes pleading. "Aunt Maya is the only one who cares." He confessed, the raw honesty of a neglected child echoing in the filthy hallway. "Aunt Maya bought our winter coats. She is the only reason we had electricity last month." when Trevor broke my school tablet because he lost his sports bet. Aunt Maya bought me a new one and secretly checked my homework every single night if Aunt Maya does not bring the grocery bags we do not eat. Trevor and Mom always say the good food in their room is for adults only. They hit us if we try to open their special refrigerator. The seasoned social worker stood up, her jaw clenched tight. She had seen terrible things in her career, but the deliberate, greedy cruelty of parents hoarding luxury, while their offspring slept on moldy mattresses, struck a uniquely vile nerve. Agent Davis turned to the lead police officer, giving a sharp, definitive nod. The environment is entirely unfit for human habitation. She declared, her voice carrying the absolute weight of state authority. I am invoking emergency removal protocols. These 6 children are entering the custody of the state foster care system. Immediately call dispatch and get 3 transport vehicles down here. We have to separate them into different emergency foster homes. The system is too crowded to keep 6 siblings together tonight. The 11-year-old boy gasped, grabbing his 3-year-old brother's hand. The younger children, sensing the terror in their older brother, began to wail. The reality of the foster system meant being torn apart, sleeping in strange houses with strangers, stripped of the only family bond they actually relied on. The police officers moved in swiftly, attempting to gather whatever clean clothing they could find to pack for the children. Though there was painfully little to take, one officer managed to find a single intact stuffed animal for the crying toddler. Just as Agent Davis was wrapping a warm blanket around the shivering infant, the screech of heavily worn brakes echoed from the driveway. An economy ride-share vehicle violently hopped the curb, coming to a jerking halt on the front lawn. Loretta threw open the car door before it even fully stopped, practically tumbling onto the grass. Since I had frozen her platinum credit cards, she had been forced to humiliate herself by begging a fellow church member for cash just to secure a cheap ride. She stormed up the porch steps, her Sunday church hat askew, completely unhinged and desperate to reclaim her matriarchal dominance. Loretta burst through the front door, her eyes wide with frantic indignation as she took in the sight of the police officers packing up her grandchildren. "What in the name of God is going on here?" she screamed, pushing past a uniformed officer. "Get your hands off my grandbabies. I am the matriarch of this family, and nobody is taking these children anywhere." Agent Davis stepped squarely into Loretta's path, blocking her access to the terrified kids. You need to step back immediately," Agent Davis ordered. "The parents of these children have been arrested for multiple felonies, and this home has been officially condemned for severe child endangerment. These minors are now under the strict legal protection of the state." Loretta scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, as if she were shooing away a minor inconvenience at a Sunday service. "You are not putting my blood in the system," she demanded, puffing out her chest to project an authority she no longer possessed. "I am their grandmother. I am claiming emergency custody right now. Pack their things and put them in my car. I am taking them home with me immediately. I demand it." Agent Davis did not blink. She pulled a heavy clipboard from her bag. "Emergency custody requires an immediate background and financial check. Let us begin right now." She clicked her pen. "Can you provide verifiable proof of stable housing, steady income, and unfrozen credit lines to support 6 dependents tonight?" Loretta scoffed violently, waving her hand in the air as if batting away a pesky insect. "I do not need to show you a piece of plastic to prove my worth." She spat, her voice carrying across the front lawn for all the nosy neighbors to hear. "I am a senior usher at Greater Hope Fellowship. I have lived in this community for 40 years. My word is my bond and my credit is the grace of the Lord. You will give me my grandchildren right now before I call my pastor and have your job." Agent Davis did not even blink. She had dealt with hundreds of delusional, image-obsessed family members who thought religious titles could override child welfare laws. "Grace does not buy groceries," Agent Davis stated coldly. She tapped her state-issued tablet, pulling up the rapid emergency background and financial screening system used for kinship placements. "You want emergency custody of 6 malnourished minors that requires immediate proof of financial stability. Let us see what the system says about your capacity to provide." Loretta stood tall, crossing her arms defensively, fully expecting her years of carefully constructed financial lies to hold up. "But digital records do not lie," And they certainly do not care about church hierarchy. Agent Davis scrolled through this tablet, her professional frown deepening into a scowl of pure disgust. You have absolutely zero verifiable income for the past 5 years, Agent Davis announced, reading the stark, undeniable data out loud. Your only listed asset is an emergency credit line that was frozen 2 hours ago due to suspicious activity. Furthermore, public records show you have over $150,000 in defaulted personal loans, severe tax liens, and multiple secondary mortgages that are actively in arrears. You are technically insolvent. Loretta physically staggered backward, as if she had been punched in the chest. The blood completely drained from her face. No, that is a mistake, she stammered, her tough facade instantly shattering into a million pieces. That debt belongs to Trevor. I just let him use my name to secure a small loan for his business startup. He promised me he paid it back. He swore to me on a Bible. Agent Davis shook her head thoroughly. Repulsed by the staggering level of generational dysfunction, you allowed an unemployed man to destroy your credit and plunge you into massive debt, and now you have zero resources to feed these starving children. You are entirely unfit to serve as an emergency kinship placement. Step off the grass immediately, or I will have these officers remove you for interfering with a state child welfare operation. Loretta collapsed onto her knees right there on the front lawn. Her expensive church hat tumbled onto the dirt. The great unyielding matriarch who had spent her entire life trying to control me, who had orchestrated a public ambush to extort my wealth, just a few hours earlier was now a broken, bankrupt woman sobbing in the dirt. She realized in one crushing instant that her precious white son-in-law had completely destroyed her life and left her destitute. With Loretta neutralized, the horrifying reality of the foster care system loomed over the front porch. The two transport vans idled in the driveway, their side doors sliding open to reveal rows of empty car seats. The 11-year-old boy gripped his 3-year-old brother's hand so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The younger children, sensing the absolute despair in their older brother's posture, began to cry hysterically. "Are we going to different houses?" the 11-year-old asked, tears streaming down his face as a police officer gently guided him toward the first van. "Please do not split us up. I promised my mom. I would watch out for the babies. I know how to make their bottles. Please let me stay with them." Agent Davis crouched down, her expression softening with genuine sorrow. "I am so sorry, sweetheart," she said gently. "But there are no emergency foster homes in the county with 6 open beds. We have to separate you for tonight, but I promise I will try to find a place where you can all be together by next week." The 10-year-old girl let out a gut-wrenching scream, throwing her arms around the 11-year-old boy's waist, refusing to let go. The toddlers joined in, creating a chaotic, deafening chorus of pure terror. They had survived their parents' neglect by relying entirely on each other. The prospect of being torn apart and placed into the homes of complete strangers was a trauma no child should ever have to endure. The police officers moved in, trying to gently pry the crying siblings apart. The neighbors watched in stunned silence, some filming the tragedy on their cell phones. It was the absolute lowest point this family had ever reached, the direct, devastating result of Chloe's greed and Trevor's arrogance. Suddenly, the sharp, commanding honk of a heavy vehicle horn cut through the chaos. A sleek black corporate SUV swerved sharply into the driveway, aggressively blocking the path of the state transport vans. The heavy tires chewed up the gravel as the vehicle slammed into park. The tinted passenger door flew open. I stepped out onto the driveway. I had traded my casual blazer for a sharply tailored dark charcoal business suit. My posture was rigid, my expression forged from absolute steel. I did not come alone. Stepping out of the driver's side was Marcus Vance, not just my lead real estate investor, but one of the most ruthless, high-powered family law attorneys in the entire state. He carried a thick leather briefcase and wore a look of lethal legal precision. The crying children on the porch stopped instantly. "Aunt Maya," the 11-year-old shouted, his voice breaking with overwhelming relief. I did not look at Loretta, who was still weeping pathetically on the grass. I marched straight past the police officers and walked directly up to Agent Davis. Marcus Vance flanked my right side, instantly presenting a thick, freshly printed stack of legal documents to the social worker. "Agent Davis, I am Maya Williams. I stated clearly, my voice projecting absolute authority over the chaotic scene. I am the maternal aunt of these 6 children. I am also the sole legal owner of this property. My attorney has just filed an expedited emergency petition for temporary kinship custody with the family court judge, which has been granted pending your immediate background check. Agent Davis looked at the official court seal on the paperwork, then looked up at me, her defensive posture relaxing slightly. Miss Williams' emergency placement requires extensive proof of financial capability, immediate secure housing, and a clean criminal record. These children cannot stay in this condemned environment for another minute. I know, I replied coldly, staring down at the filthy, neglected house that I was about to gut and remodel. That is why they are not staying here. My attorney has provided my verified financial portfolios, my completely clean background check, and the deed to my primary residence, which boasts 6,000 square feet, a fully stocked industrial kitchen, and a state-of-the-art security system. I have already dispatched a private pediatric nurse to my home to evaluate their health upon arrival. You can run my name through your tablet right now. Agent Davis. You will find that I possess more than enough capital stability and legal firepower to take every single one of my nieces and nephews home with me today. The transition from the filthy condemned house to my secure 6,000 square foot estate happened within a single afternoon. My private pediatric nurse immediately evaluated all 6 children, treating the infant's severe diaper rash and providing a specialized meal plan for the malnourished older siblings. For the first time in their lives, they slept in their own beds with fresh linen and full stomachs. I took a week off from my real estate firm to establish a rigid, comforting routine. But peace is a temporary luxury when you are dealing with a parasite. Just 4 days after the arrests, my security team notified me that Trevor was out of jail. Loretta could not afford his bail, but Trevor had reached out to a sketchy associate from his offshore sports betting syndicate. Vinny fronted the cash to keep Trevor quiet about their illegal gambling rings. Chloe remained incarcerated for 2 more days before her public defender managed to get her released on a heavily restricted bond. The moment Trevor hit the streets, his arrogant sense of white privilege shifted into terrifying overdrive. He was broke, facing multiple felony charges and locked out of the property, but refused defeat. Instead, he found a predator who spoke his exact language. Trevor hired an aggressive attorney known for filing frivolous lawsuits to extort quick settlements. Together, they crafted a legal attack so profoundly delusional it could only have been born from absolute entitlement. My phone buzzed with an alert from Marcus Vance, warning me that Trevor had just filed a massive countersuit against me in family court. The sheer audacity of his demands was staggering. Trevor was suing me for parental alienation, claiming I had used my corporate wealth to brainwash his children and unlawfully rip them from a loving biracial home. But the financial demands were the true core of his attack. Because I had temporary custody and a high net worth, his predatory lawyer found a loophole to demand I pay Trevor and Chloe $20,000 a month in reverse child support. He argued that my hostile takeover of the children deprived them of their parental purpose and caused severe emotional distress, requiring massive monthly compensation. Furthermore, the malicious lawsuit demanded 50% of the equity in my ancestral home. Trevor claimed he was entitled to hundreds of thousands of dollars under the legal concept of sweat equity. His official court filing actually stated that he had mowed the lawn, cleaned the gutters, and supervised minor repairs over the past 4 years, making him a de facto co-owner of my real estate property. He was demanding I liquidate my assets to pay him for doing basic household chores while living rent-free on my dime. Trevor knew a standard legal delivery would not satisfy his need for revenge. He wanted to humiliate me publicly, to crack my composed facade in front of my community. He meticulously planned his strike for the most vulnerable part of my new routine. Monday morning arrived with its usual chaotic energy. I had just finished making breakfast and packing 6 separate lunches. I loaded the kids into my company minibus, ensuring the older ones had their backpacks and the toddlers were securely strapped into their car seats. We pulled up to the circular driveway of the prestigious private magnet school I had emergency enrolled them in. The drop-off zone was packed with affluent parents, teachers, and crossing guards directing the heavy morning traffic. I stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting my tailored suit jacket, and walked around to slide open the side door. My 11-year-old nephew hopped out holding his younger sister's hand, smiling as he thanked me for his lunchbox. Right as I turned to unbuckle the toddler, a man in a rumpled gray suit shoved his way through a group of chatting mothers. He marched directly into the busy drop-off lane, ignoring the crossing guard's whistle. "Maya Williams," he shouted, his voice echoing loudly over the idling car engines. The surrounding parents immediately stopped talking, turning their heads to watch the commotion. I stepped in front of my nieces and nephews, instinctively shielding them from the aggressive stranger. "Are you Maya Williams?" the man demanded, thrusting a thick stack of manila folders aggressively toward my chest. I did not flinch. "Yes, I am," I replied, maintaining absolute composure. "Consider yourself served," he yelled, shoving the heavy legal documents directly into my hands, before turning around and jogging away through the crowd of stunned parents. My 11-year-old nephew gripped my suit jacket, his eyes wide with rising panic. His small hands were shaking uncontrollably, terrified that the nightmare he had just escaped was returning to drag him away. "Aunt Maya, is that man taking us back to Trevor?" he asked, his voice trembling with fear. I knelt right there on the concrete sidewalk, ignoring the whispering parents and staring teachers who were watching this unfold. I looked my nephew directly in the eyes. "Nobody is ever taking you back to that house," I promised him, my voice radiating absolute certainty. "Have a great day at school, and I will be right here waiting for you at 3 o'clock. I watched them walk safely through the front doors of the academy. I stood up, smoothing my jacket, and looked down at the absurd lawsuit demanding $20,000 a month and half my ancestral property. I walked back to the driver's seat of my vehicle and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone and dialed my attorney. Marcus answered on the first ring. "He served me at the school," I stated, my tone ice cold. "Trevor wants to play dirty." Marcus chuckled, a dark, lethal sound over the receiver. "Does he really now?" I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Yes," I finally said. "Call the FBI contact we secured last week, Marcus. It is time to activate Phase 2. The heavy mahogany doors of the county family courthouse swung shut, sealing us inside a room where my sister intended to legally extort my entire life savings. I sat at the respondent's table next to Marcus Vance, my posture perfectly rigid, my charcoal suit immaculate. Across the aisle sat Trevor and Chloe. They had clearly been coached by their predatory attorney, a slick, aggressive man named Sterling, who paced the floor with the predatory confidence of a shark smelling blood in the water. Trevor wore an ill-fitting suit that did nothing to hide his arrogant smirk, while Chloe sat beside him in a modest maternity dress, looking appropriately tragic and fragile. They were banking entirely on playing the ultimate victims, relying on deeply rooted societal prejudices to paint me as the villain in their manufactured tragedy. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice echoing loudly across the sterile courtroom. "We are here today because my clients are the victims of a malicious, calculated, hostile takeover of their family unit." The woman sitting across, Maya Williams, is a wealthy, single workaholic corporate executive who has decided that her financial superiority gives her the right to rip 6 innocent children from their loving parents. Sterling walked slowly toward the judge's bench, gesturing dramatically toward Trevor and Chloe. "My clients are a beautiful, struggling biracial family. They have hit a temporary financial rough patch, a situation entirely common in today's economy." Instead of offering sisterly support, Maya weaponized her corporate wealth to evict a pregnant mother and alienate a devoted father. She is a bitter, childless woman, projecting her own life dissatisfactions onto a traditional family structure, attempting to buy the children she could never have herself. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, my facial expression carved from absolute stone. I could feel the racial and social microaggressions dripping from Sterling's opening statement. He was deliberately leaning into the offensive trope of the angry, aggressive, hyper-independent black woman who wanted to punish a white man simply for existing in her space. It was a vile, calculated performance designed to manipulate the judge's sympathies and distract from the fact that my nieces and nephews had been starving on moldy mattresses while Trevor bought limited edition sneakers. Sterling called Chloe to the witness stand. My sister walked slowly, clutching the wooden railing as she took her seat, making sure the judge got a very clear view of her 7-month pregnant belly. The moment she swore on the Bible, the theatrical waterworks began. Chloe did not just cry, she practically hyperventilated on the stand, dabbing her eyes with a tissue and speaking in a frail, trembling whisper. "She hates us," Chloe sobbed into the microphone, looking directly at the judge with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Maya has always been jealous of my happiness. She despises the fact that I have a husband who loves me and a home filled with children. She especially hates Trevor because he is a white man who refuses to bow down to her corporate bullying. She deliberately locked us out of our own bank accounts, threw us out into the street, and kidnapped my babies just to break my spirit." Sterling nodded sympathetically, pacing in front of the witness stand. "And Mrs. Williams, did your sister ever show genuine maternal care for your children before this hostile custody grab?" "Never," Chloe lied effortlessly, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "She just throws money at things to control people. She does not know how to be a mother. She just wants to punish Trevor and me because we rely on traditional family values instead of corporate greed. My babies are terrified of her. They cry for their father every single night. I just want my family back. I just want to go home and prepare for my new baby in peace." Trevor nodded vigorously from the petitioner's table, projecting the image of a heartbroken, unfairly persecuted father. He actually wiped a fake tear from his eye. They were executing their extortion playbook flawlessly. They fully expected Marcus to object, to aggressively cross-examine Chloe, and to put me on the stand to defend my character. They wanted a loud, emotional screaming match to prove to the judge that I was exactly the volatile, aggressive woman Sterling claimed I was. They wanted a circus, but Marcus Vance did not object a single time. During the entire agonizing hour of character assassination, blatant perjury, and racial dog whistling, my attorney sat completely silent. He did not tap his pen. He did not shuffle papers. He simply watched them dig their own legal graves with the cold, detached fascination of a coroner performing an autopsy. I remained equally silent, projecting an aura of absolute, unbothered power that clearly began to unnerve Trevor as the minutes ticked by. Sterling finally concluded his aggressive examination, shooting a triumphant, arrogant smirk in our direction. He took his seat, utterly convinced he had just secured a massive monthly child support settlement and half the equity of my ancestral estate. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance regarding family court theatrics, looked over her reading glasses at our table. "Mr. Vance," the judge prompted, her tone signaling that it was time for our defense. "Are you prepared to cross-examine the witness, or would you like to call your first character witness to the stand?" Marcus Vance stood up slowly. He buttoned his bespoke tailored suit jacket with deliberate, agonizing precision. The courtroom fell utterly silent. He did not call a character witness. He did not summon a child psychologist or a social worker. He did not even address the absurd defamatory claims Chloe had just spent an hour vomiting onto the official court record. Instead, Marcus reached down to his pristine leather briefcase and retrieved a single thick, heavy dossier, securely bound in a tamper-evident envelope. He walked confidently past Sterling, past a suddenly pale Chloe, and stopped directly in front of the bench. He handed the heavy package up to the judge. The top of the envelope bore the undeniable, highly classified seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Your Honor," Marcus stated, his voice echoing with lethal, devastating authority, "we have no need for character witnesses today. Instead, we submit this federal criminal evidence into the official record, which will definitively prove exactly why this man is demanding my client's money." The judge sliced open the heavy tamper-evident seal of the federal envelope with a silver letter opener. The sharp sound echoed like a gunshot in the perfectly silent courtroom. Sterling stood frozen by the petitioner's table, his previous arrogance entirely evaporating as he craned his neck, trying desperately to catch a glimpse of the heavily redacted pages. Trevor shifted uncomfortably in his wooden chair, the smug grin wiping completely off his face. Chloe stopped her performative sniffling, her eyes darting between Marcus and the bench. Your Honor, I strongly object to this highly irregular submission. Sterling stammered, his voice lacking its earlier theatrical boom. Opposing counsel cannot simply drop sealed federal documents into a family court custody proceeding without prior discovery. This is a blatant violation of court procedure and highly prejudicial against my client. Marcus Vance did not even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on the judge. The documents inside that dossier were unsealed by a federal magistrate at exactly 6 o'clock this morning, Your Honor. They are directly relevant to the petitioner's fitness as a parent and his malicious financial demands against my client. They also explain exactly why my client holds the deed to the property. Mr. Sterling just claimed his client has a legal right to. The judge held up a hand, silencing Sterling before he could utter another objection. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the first page. The courtroom temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The judge flipped to the second page, then the third, her expression shifting from judicial neutrality to absolute unadulterated shock. She looked down at Trevor, her gaze filled with pure disgust. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. You are submitting into the official record that the petitioner Trevor is the primary target of an active multi-state federal investigation for identity theft and wire fraud. Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied, his voice ringing with lethal clarity. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been tracking this man for 6 months. However, the origin of his criminal enterprise directly involves the matriarch of this family. If you turn to page 4, you will see the exact timeline of events from 4 years ago. Trevor illegally obtained the Social Security number and banking credentials of his mother-in-law, Loretta Williams. He then used her pristine credit history to forge multiple, highly leveraged secondary mortgages against the Williams ancestral home. A collective horrified gasp went up from the gallery. Loretta, who had insisted on attending the hearing to support her golden child. Chloe was sitting in the second row. She shot up from the wooden bench, her hands gripping the back of the pew in front of her. That is a lie, Loretta shouted, her voice shaking with absolute panic. Trevor would never do such a thing. He is a good man. He was building a business. He promised me he was making responsible investments. Marcus turned slowly to face my mother, projecting his voice so every single word hit her like a physical blow. He did not build a business. Mrs. Williams, he committed massive mortgage fraud using your personal identity. He drained hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity from the property your grandparents built from the ground up. He funneled that stolen money into offshore sports betting syndicates and completely abandoned the loan payments. He left your name on the defaulted debt and let the banks initiate foreclosure proceedings against you. Trevor leaped up from his chair, his face turning a violent shade of purple. That is fake, he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. She printed fake federal papers. She is trying to frame me because I am a white man taking care of her black nieces and nephews. She hates me, and she wants to destroy my family. Sit down and remain silent, or I will have the bailiffs gag you, the judge roared, slamming her gavel so hard the wood cracked. The judge glared at Sterling counsel. Control your client immediately, or he will be held in criminal contempt before this custody hearing is even adjourned. Sterling grabbed Trevor's arm forcefully, yanking him back down into his seat. Sterling looked physically sick, realizing he had tied his legal career to a man about to be indicted by the federal government. Marcus turned back to the judge, his posture rigid. Your Honor, Trevor is demanding 50% of the equity in a house he claims he maintained. But the federal documents prove he is the exact reason the bank was 24 hours away from seizing that property and throwing his pregnant wife, his 6 children, and his mother-in-law out onto the street. The only reason that family did not end up entirely homeless is because my client Maya Williams stepped in. She discovered the massive foreclosure notices hidden in the mail to protect her mother's immense pride and to keep a roof over her nieces' and nephews' heads. Maya secretly paid off the massive fraudulent debt in pure cash. She bought the house directly from the bank, saving her family from total ruin, while Trevor continued to steal from them. The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. Everyone turned to look at Loretta, the grand matriarch who had spent the last 4 years treating me like a bitter, selfish failure, finally understood the magnitude of her own blindness. She realized her perfect, flawless son-in-law was the architect of her complete financial destruction. She realized the daughter she had publicly shunned and attempted to extort was the only reason she was not sleeping on a park bench. Loretta's eyes widened in sheer unimaginable terror. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. She looked at Trevor, who refused to meet her gaze, his guilt radiating through the silent room. She looked at me sitting calmly at the respondent's table, the undeniable truth written across my face. Loretta raised a trembling hand to her breaking chest. She collapsed. Loretta hit the solid oak floor. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The stern family court judge slammed her gavel, ordering the bailiffs to clear the aisles and dial emergency services. I did not stand up. I sat perfectly still at the respondent's table next to Marcus Vance, my posture unbroken. For 32 years, Loretta demanded my absolute submission, draining my emotional and financial reserves to prop up her golden child and the white son-in-law she worshipped. Now she was suffering a stress-induced cardiac event because the man she sacrificed me for had completely destroyed her life. I watched the heavy wooden doors swing open as two paramedics rushed down the center aisle with a stretcher and a trauma kit. They knelt beside my mother, administering oxygen and lifting her onto the gurney. Chloe did not even look at our mother as she was wheeled out of the courtroom. Chloe's eyes were fixated on the thick federal dossier resting on the judge's bench, the illusion of her perfect superior. Family was crumbling, and she knew the worst was yet to come. "Order in this court!" The judge commanded, her voice cutting through the lingering murmurs in the gallery. "We are returning to the matter at hand. Mr. Vance, you were explaining the fraudulent wire transfers originating from the petitioner's stolen mortgage funds." Marcus stood tall, smoothing his suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. If you turn to page 7 of the federal indictment file, you will find the exact destination of the remaining stolen equity." Trevor did not merely lose his mother-in-law's money through illegal offshore sports betting. He made a highly calculated real estate purchase. Trevor jumped out of his chair, his face slick with cold sweat. "Do not read that," Trevor shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Your Honor, this has nothing to do with child custody. This is a private financial matter." Sterling grabbed his client's belt, yanking him down and hissing at him to shut his mouth before catching an obstruction charge. The judge glared at Trevor with pure concentrated venom. "Everything you do with stolen money while claiming you cannot afford to feed your 6 children is relevant here," the judge snapped. "Proceed, Mr. Vance." Marcus adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Chloe. On August 14th, Trevor initiated a wire transfer of $150,000 to a holding company. He used those funds as a cash down payment on a luxury high-rise condominium located in the downtown arts district. However, Trevor does not reside at this property, nor does he lease it out for rental income. According to the FBI surveillance logs, the sole occupant of this luxury condo is a 22-year-old fitness influencer named Amber. The courtroom fell dead silent. Chloe stopped breathing. Her hands, which had rested protectively over her pregnant belly, slowly dropped to her sides. She turned her head mechanically, staring at the man she had proudly flaunted as her superior white husband. The man she allowed to kick me out of my own master bedroom. The man she let starve her own children. "I bought a condo for another woman," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling violently. "We were getting eviction notices. My babies were sleeping on moldy mattresses on the floor. You told me you were stressed about your startup company." Trevor backed his chair away, raising his hands defensively. "Baby, listen to me. It is not what it sounds like. It was an investment property. I was going to flip it for a profit so we could buy a new house. She is just a tenant. I swear to God." "Chloe, they are twisting the facts to tear us apart." Marcus, simply read the next line from the federal dossier. The Bureau confiscated Trevor's secondary cell phone last week. Text messages between Trevor and Amber confirm he pays her monthly maintenance fees, buys her designer bags, and explicitly promised to leave his pregnant wife once he secured a large financial settlement from his wealthy sister-in-law. That was the final match thrown onto a massive powder keg. Chloe let out a primal, blood-curdling scream that tore through the sterile courtroom. She transformed into a woman unhinged by ultimate betrayal. Chloe lunged across the petitioner's table with terrifying speed. She launched her body weight at Trevor, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward onto the floor. Trevor hit the ground hard, but Chloe was already on top of him. She swung her fists wildly, her fingernails clawing deeply into his face and neck. "You stole from my mother," she shrieked, punching him repeatedly. "You let my children starve while you bought a condo for a teenager. I hate you, I will kill you." Trevor raised his arms desperately, trying to shield his face from her manic, violent assault. He scrambled backward, sliding across the polished floor, blood pooling from deep, jagged scratches across his cheek and nose. Sterling scrambled out of the way, pressing his back against the courtroom wall, abandoning his client to avoid the crossfire. The judge slammed her wooden gavel with furious, rapid strikes, screaming for the bailiffs. Two heavy-set court officers rushed the aisle, diving onto the floor to pry a violently thrashing Chloe off her bleeding husband. It took both grown men to drag her backward. Chloe kicked and spat, her maternity dress torn, her hair a wild, tangled mess, screaming murder at the man she partnered with to destroy my life. "This is a disgrace," the judge roared, standing up from her bench, her face flushed with unprecedented judicial fury. "Restrain her immediately. Get him off the floor and into that chair. I will not tolerate this violent circus in my courtroom for one more second." The bailiffs forced a sobbing Chloe into her seat, standing directly behind her with hands resting on their utility belts. Trevor sat bleeding onto his wrinkled collar, nursing a swollen, rapidly bruising eye, looking like the pathetic, broken criminal he truly was. I sat across the aisle, hands neatly folded, watching the ashes of their toxic alliance scatter across the room. The judge pointed her gavel directly at the petitioner's table. "Both of you are facing severe sanctions for this display," she declared, her voice cold and absolute. "I have heard enough lies. I have seen enough evidence. There will be no more testimony. Court is now in order, and I am issuing my final legally binding ruling on the custody of these children and the financial demands placed before me right now." The judge stared from the elevated bench, her eyes devoid of sympathy. Looking at the bleeding man at this petitioner's table, the judge spoke. "Trevor had the audacity to demand equity in a property he actively tried to destroy." Her voice uncompromising. "He claimed sweat equity while stealing hundreds of thousands from his mother-in-law and leaving his children in squalor. I dismiss the demands for a 50% stake with profound prejudice. You hold zero claim to that property. Furthermore, your demand for child support is denied. It is an insult to parental responsibility. You contributed nothing to the welfare of these minors." The courtroom remained still as the judge turned to the custody petition. "Based on the horrific evidence provided by Child Protective Services, the medical evaluations, and the financial documentation, I find both Trevor and Chloe entirely unfit to serve as parents. The calculated neglect documented demonstrates a malicious disregard for human life. Therefore, I grant Maya Williams full permanent legal and physical custody of all 6 children." Chloe gasped, but the judge was not finished. "Given the volatile behavior exhibited today and the undeniable lack of stable housing or financial resources, I also grant Maya Williams preemptive emergency custody of the unborn child immediately upon delivery. Your parental rights are stripped effective this exact second. You will have no unsupervised contact with these children." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with an echoing crack, finalizing the destruction of their toxic empire. Before the echo faded, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung wide open. 4 men wearing dark tactical vests spelling United States Marshal across their chests marched down the center aisle. They bypassed the local court bailiffs, moving with lethal precision straight toward the petitioner's table. Trevor scrambled backward in his chair, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits. Sterling, his predatory attorney, immediately took 3 large steps away, physically distancing himself from the toxic fallout of his own client. Trevor, the lead federal marshal, announced, carrying inescapable authority, "We are executing a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are being taken into federal custody for wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. Stand up and place your hands behind your back immediately." Trevor let out a pathetic whimper. He looked at the judge, extending a shaking hand. "Your Honor, please, you have to stop them. I have rights. I need to call my startup investors." The judge looked down with unadulterated contempt. "You do not have investors. You have a federal indictment. Officers, clear this courtroom of this criminal immediately. Two marshals grabbed Trevor by the arms, hauling him forcefully out of his chair. They slammed his wrists together behind his back, the heavy steel handcuffs clicking shut with a loud finality that signaled the end of his parasitic reign. Trevor began to cry, desperate tears streaming down his scratched face as they dragged him backward down the aisle. He screamed for Sterling to file an injunction, but the sleazy lawyer was already shoving files into his briefcase, refusing to look his way. Howe was hauled out in chains, leaving a stunning silence in his wake. With Trevor gone and Loretta being loaded into an ambulance outside, Chloe was left entirely devastatingly alone. The reality crashed down on her with the weight of a collapsing building. She had no husband, no mother to bail her out, no access to credit cards, and no legal rights to the children she had used as pawns. The eviction notice I served meant she was legally barred from the ancestral home. She was a pregnant woman with no money, no allies, and an active child endangerment investigation over her head. She turned her head slowly, her bloodshot eyes locking onto me. I sat calmly at the respondent's table, sliding my legal documents back into my leather briefcase. Marcus Vance snapped his briefcase shut, offering a tight, victorious nod. I stood up, smoothing my charcoal suit jacket, preparing to walk out of the courthouse and return to the secure home where my nieces and nephews were waiting for me. "Maya, wait!" Chloe croaked, her voice devoid of its usual arrogant hostility. She stumbled away from her table, her torn maternity dress hanging off her shoulders. She crossed the aisle, her legs shaking violently. Before Marcus or the court bailiffs could intercept her, Chloe collapsed directly onto the hardwood floor right at my feet. She fell to her knees, looking up at me with an expression of pure, unfiltered agony. "Maya, please, you cannot leave me like this," she sobbed, grabbing the hem of my suit pants. Her fingers dug into the fabric, desperate and trembling. "I have nowhere to go. Trevor took everything. He ruined me. You have to let me come back to the house. Just let me stay in the basement. I will follow your rules. I will do whatever you ask. Please, Maya, you are my sister. You cannot put me out on the street. I have nothing." I looked down at the woman who had happily watched her husband try to steal my wealth, who abandoned her starving children, and who gleefully slapped me across the face in front of my entire church congregation. I felt absolutely no pity. "Let go of my clothes," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, lethal whisper that froze the remaining air in her lungs. Chloe opened her mouth to beg again, but a sudden sharp gasp escaped her lips instead. Her eyes went incredibly wide, pupils dilating in sudden raw panic. She clutched her swollen belly, her fingernails digging into her own skin. A loud, wet splashing sound hit the polished oak floor of the courtroom. A pool of clear fluid rapidly spread outward from beneath her knees, soaking the wood. "Maya!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the sterile room, completely consumed by raw, primal terror. "Maya, my water just broke. The baby is coming right now." The sharp, unmistakable scent of amniotic fluid hung in the sterile air of the courtroom. Chloe remained on her knees, her hands clutching her swollen abdomen as another violent contraction ripped through her body. She looked up at me, her face pale and contorted in agony, expecting the old Maya to instantly drop to the floor and comfort her. She expected the sister who had always cleaned up her messes to wrap an arm around her, tell her everything was going to be all right, and promise her a warm bed in the ancestral home. I did not move a single muscle to comfort her. I looked down at the puddle soaking into the polished oak floor, then stepped neatly backward, ensuring my tailored trousers remained completely dry. The court bailiffs sprang into action, shouting into their radios for a medical emergency response unit, but I simply stood there like a fortress of ice. "Maya, please help me!" Chloe wailed, her voice cracking as another wave of pain seized her. "It hurts so much. I need my husband. I need my mom. You have to take me to the hospital and bring me home afterward. I cannot do this alone." "You are alone because you pushed everyone who actually cared about you away to protect a parasite," I replied, my voice carrying no malice, only an absolute chilling indifference. "Your husband is currently being processed into federal lockup. Your mother is in a cardiac ward because she realized her golden boy stole her entire future. And your other 6 children are safely sleeping in my house, far away from the squalor you left them in." Chloe sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I have nothing left," she gasped out between heavy pants. "Just let me come to the house after the baby is born. Just the basement. I promise I will not ask for anything else. I will be quiet. I looked down at the woman who had happily stood by while Trevor swung a crowbar at my livelihood, who had slapped me across the face in front of our entire church congregation, and who had let my nieces and nephews sleep on moldy mattresses. Pity was a luxury she had entirely exhausted. I am going to call an ambulance for you, Chloe, I stated clearly, pulling my cell phone from my pocket. But before I dial dispatch, we are going to establish the new reality of your life. There are absolutely no more free rides. You are not coming back to the ancestral home. You are not moving into my basement. You are not getting a single dime of my corporate wealth to fund your recovery. Chloe stared up at me, her eyes wide with sheer panic, as the severity of my boundaries finally pierced through her entitlement. Then where am I supposed to go? She cried. You are going to a state-funded rehabilitation and maternal care facility, I informed her, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. I know exactly what kind of prescription pills you were hiding in that luxury bedroom while your kids starved. The court knows it too. You are going to sign yourself into a mandatory inpatient program. You are going to learn how to be a functioning adult, and you are going to take state-mandated parenting classes. If you refuse, I will personally ensure the state takes permanent custody of the child you are about to deliver, and you will walk out of the hospital straight onto the street with nothing but the hospital gown on your back. A harsh guttural moan escaped Chloe's lips as another contraction hit. She gripped the edge of the respondent's table, her knuckles turning white. You are a monster, she hissed through gritted teeth. No, I am the only consequence you have ever faced, I corrected her. Do we have a deal, Chloe? State rehab or the street? Make your choice right now before the paramedics walk through those doors. Chloe looked around the massive courtroom. The judge had already exited to her chambers. Sterling had vanished. The bailiffs offered no sympathy, only maintaining a secure perimeter. She was utterly out of options, stripped of her white privilege, by proxy stripped of her matriarchal protection, and stripped of her golden child armor. Okay, she sobbed her head, dropping in total defeat. Okay, I will go to the facility. Just please call the ambulance. I dialed emergency services, calmly reporting a woman in active labor at the county courthouse. Within 3 minutes, paramedics rushed through the double doors with a mobile stretcher. They hoisted Chloe onto the gurney, securing her quickly as her contractions accelerated. I watched them wheel her out of the courtroom, her cries fading down the marble hallway. I did not follow her. My obligation to her ended the moment the elevator doors closed. Marcus Vance snapped his briefcase shut, turning to me with a look of profound professional respect. You handled that with surgical precision, Maya. The judge has officially signed the final custody and eviction orders. The property is legally cleared of all tenants. Thank you, Marcus, I replied, picking up my own briefcase. I have one last stop to make today. I walked out of the courthouse and drove straight to the ancestral home. For years, this property had been a symbol of Loretta's toxic matriarchy, a place where I was treated like a walking checkbook, while Trevor was treated like royalty. But as I pulled into the driveway, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Waiting on the front lawn was a team of 4 professional locksmiths and 2 large, intimidating men wearing dark suits from the private security firm I had retained. I stepped out of my car, handing the lead locksmith the official court order. Change every single lock on the property, I commanded. The front doors, the back deck, the windows, and the garage. Drill out the old cylinders if you have to. I want completely new hardware installed within the hour. No exceptions. The contractors nodded immediately, grabbing their heavy tool belts and marching up the porch steps. The sound of high-powered drills echoed across the front yard, a beautiful mechanical symphony, signaling the permanent end of Trevor's reign. I turned to the security guards, handing them a printed list with photographs of Trevor, Chloe, and Loretta. These individuals are legally barred from stepping foot on this land, I instructed the guards. If they show up, you do not engage in conversation. You do not listen to their excuses. You immediately call the police and have them arrested for criminal trespassing. I want a patrol car stationed at the end of the driveway 24 hours a day until further notice. Understood, Ms. Williams, the lead guard replied, taking up his post at the entrance of the driveway. I stood on the front lawn, watching the heavy brass locks being swapped out for modern high-security deadbolts. The moldy, neglected energy of the house was already lifting. I had protected my wealth, secured the safety of my nieces and nephews, and completely dismantled the toxic hierarchy that had suffocated me for over 3 decades. I took a deep cleansing breath of the warm afternoon air, feeling the undeniable absolute power of officially claiming my empire. But the true test of this new reality was waiting for me back at my own estate, where 6 traumatized children were about to ask the hardest question of all. When I opened the heavy oak doors of my estate, 6 pairs of wide, terrified eyes looked up at me from the living room floor. The 11-year-old boy, still clutching his youngest brother's hand, stood up slowly. "Aunt Maya," he asked, his voice trembling with a fear no child should ever carry. "Are we going to foster care now?" I dropped my briefcase and knelt right there on the imported rug, bringing myself down to their eye level. "No," I told him, making sure every single child heard the absolute certainty in my voice. "You are never going to another house again. You are coming home with me permanently." I had spent the last 3 weeks pouring my corporate resources into completely gutting and renovating the ancestral property. What used to be a toxic shrine to Loretta's matriarchy and Trevor's parasitic hoarding was now a pristine modern fortress designed entirely for children. I walked them through the brand new front doors, watching their jaws drop. The moldy mattresses and empty closets were gone. I had hired an elite interior design team to build custom bedrooms for every single child. The girls had massive walk-in closets filled with brand new clothes, their names painted elegantly on the solid wood doors. The boys had custom bunk beds with built-in desks and high-speed computers for their homework. The infant and the newborn baby girl I had just brought home from the neonatal intensive care unit after Chloe's emergency delivery shared a state-of-the-art nursery. It was monitored by a round-the-clock pediatric nurse I kept on a generous corporate retainer. For the first time in their entire lives, my nieces and nephews did not have to beg for a meal or scavenge through a barren pantry. I walked them into the massive chef's kitchen, where a private cook had prepared a massive spread of baked chicken, macaroni and cheese, fresh vegetables, and warm cornbread. The 10-year-old girl started crying when I told her she could open the refrigerator whenever she wanted. It was fully stocked with fresh fruit juice boxes and healthy snacks. There were no heavy padlocks on the pantry doors. There was no screaming or violent arguments echoing down the hallway. There was no Trevor hiding in a master suite hoarding luxury goods while they starved. There was only peace, safety, and the undeniable warmth of a Black woman who had built a financial empire specifically to protect her bloodline. But raising 7 children while running a multi-million-dollar real estate development firm required military-level logistics. I was not about to let my business suffer, and I was certainly not going to let my new children feel neglected for a single second. I applied my corporate problem-solving skills directly to my new journey of motherhood. The very next morning, I purchased a sleek black customized Mercedes-Benz Sprinter minibus under my corporate holding company. I had it professionally retrofitted with plush leather seating, built-in secure wireless internet, and fold-down executive desks. It was the ultimate family transport vehicle, allowing me to move my massive new family across the city with absolute safety and premium comfort. I integrated my corporate life with my role as their mother figure seamlessly. My boardroom became a space where my older nephews could sit quietly and do their homework while I negotiated multi-million-dollar commercial zoning deals. My business partners, who had once been concerned about the public relations nightmare Trevor tried to cause, were now entirely in awe of my daily operation. Marcus Vance watched me finalize a $10 million affordable housing project while simultaneously bottle-feeding a newborn and signing 3 different middle school permission slips. I treated my household like a flawless corporate acquisition, implementing structured daily routines, hiring top-tier educational tutors, and demanding academic excellence from every single child. They thrived under the consistent structure and the strict but loving boundaries. The heavy anxiety melted away from their young faces, replaced by the confident, glowing aura of Black children who finally knew they were fiercely loved and heavily protected. We were sitting in the newly renovated dining room on a Sunday afternoon, enjoying a massive family dinner that actually felt like a real family, when my private security guard knocked on the reinforced glass door. He handed me a wrinkled, tear-stained envelope that had been dropped off at the front security gate. I recognized the erratic, shaky handwriting immediately. It was a letter from Loretta. I opened the envelope, scanning the desperate, pathetic words of a matriarch who had lost her entire kingdom. Maya, please, the letter read in smeared blue ink. I have lost absolutely everything. Trevor ruined my credit. The bank repossessed my car, and Chloe is locked away in that state facility, refusing to speak to me. I am living in a tiny subsidized apartment on the bad side of town, and I am so entirely alone. I miss my beautiful grandchildren. I know I made terrible mistakes, and I know I was blind to the truths, but I am begging you for mercy and forgiveness. Please let me come to the big house. Please let me be a grandmother again. Do not shut me out of their lives forever. I looked up from the wrinkled letter. My 11-year-old nephew was laughing brightly, helping his younger sister cut her food at the head of the table. They were safe, and they were finally healing. I was not about to let Loretta's toxic guilt infect the beautiful sanctuary I had bled to build. I pulled out my expensive company letterhead and wrote a swift, merciless response. Mom, forgiveness is earned through changed behavior, not desperate apologies when you have run out of options, I wrote. You will not step foot on my property. If you want to see them, you will agree to supervised visits only, once a month. Exactly 12 months after I mailed that uncompromising letter, I found myself sitting behind my custom mahogany desk, looking down at the freshly printed glossy cover of Forbes magazine. My own face looked back at me. I was wearing a sharp emerald green suit, my posture radiating absolute certainty. The bold white headline across the bottom read, "Building Black Generational Wealth One Neighborhood at a Time." My real estate development firm had not just survived Trevor's malicious smear campaign, it had exploded into a massive enterprise. Marcus Vance and I successfully completed the $10 million affordable housing project ahead of schedule, and investors were lining up to fund our next ventures. We were revitalizing forgotten historic communities without displacing original residents, proving corporate success and community integrity could coexist beautifully. The financial empire I had quietly built in the shadows was now a beacon of undeniable power in the bright light of day. But while my empire was rising to unprecedented heights, the toxic kingdom my family had tried to build on my back had completely turned to ash. The federal justice system does not care about white privilege when there is an ironclad paper trail of mortgage fraud. Trevor stood before a federal judge last October, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that completely drained him of his unearned arrogance. His expensive predatory lawyer had long since abandoned him. The judge sentenced Trevor to 10 full years in a federal penitentiary without early parole. There were no country club prisons for him. He was sent to a maximum security facility out of state. The man who had confidently demanded $15,000 from me and threatened my life with a brass paperweight was now stripped of his freedom, his name, and his dignity. He spends his days making 50 cents an hour in the prison laundry room, a fitting reality for a man who always believed the world owed him a living. Chloe faced a similarly brutal reality check. When she finally checked out of the state-mandated rehabilitation facility, she walked into a world that no longer catered to her weaponized victimhood. Because she completely failed her psychological evaluations, the state permanently terminated her parental rights. She lost her golden child armor completely. Today, my sister works the evening shift at a greasy fast food drive-thru on the edge of the city. She wears a polyester uniform and smells like frying oil. But the most poetic piece of justice arrives on the first of every single month. By order of the family court, Chloe is legally mandated to pay child support for the 7 children she neglected. The state automatically garnishes $200 directly from her minimum wage paychecks and deposits it straight into my corporate accounts. I do not even need the money, but I make sure every single penny of Chloe's garnished wages goes directly into a college trust fund for her oldest son. The woman who tried to extort my ancestral property is now legally forced to fund my nieces and nephews' futures one greasy burger at a time. And then there is Loretta. The grand matriarch who once ruled our family cookouts now lives in a tiny one-bedroom subsidized apartment on the outskirts of the county. Her massive debts incurred by trusting her white son-in-law completely wiped out her credit. She has no guest room and absolutely no power. The church elders who once flocked to her defense now treat her with polite, distant pity. She is a fallen queen living in a concrete box. I kept my word regarding her visitation. Once a month, under the strict supervision of my private security team, Loretta visits the children at a public park. She sits on a wooden bench watching my nieces and nephews run and play, knowing she will never again have the authority to control their lives or mine. She is a spectator to the beautiful legacy she tried so desperately to destroy. Leaving my downtown office, I drove back to the ancestral estate. The high iron security gates glided open, welcoming me into the pristine sanctuary I had fought so fiercely to protect. The late afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow across the perfectly manicured lawn. I parked and walked up the front steps, stepping onto the wide wooden porch. The sound of pure, unbridled joy drifted from the massive backyard. I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing, watching my 7 legally adopted children playing safely in the grass. The oldest boy was teaching his younger brothers how to throw a football while the girls chased the family golden retriever around the massive oak tree. The newborn baby girl who entered this world in the middle of a chaotic courtroom was fast asleep, watched over closely by our live and pediatric nurse. They were brilliant, healthy, and free from the suffocating anxiety that used to define their daily existence. I took a deep breath of the sweet summer air, feeling the solid historic wood of my family home beneath my hands. Society has expected Black women to be the mules of their families. We are expected to carry the heavy burdens to fund the mistakes of our relatives and to smile through the blatant disrespect just to keep the peace. We are told that blood is thicker than water, and we must endure toxic environments in the name of familial loyalty. But I rewrote that narrative entirely. I realized that blood simply means you share a genetic history, but family is a deliberate choice. Family is safety, respect, and mutual growth. I chose to break a toxic generational curse that would have swallowed these 7 children whole. I chose to be the villain in my mother's story, so I could be the absolute hero in my own. The fatal price of underestimating a Black woman building her empire is total destruction. Trevor and Chloe looked at me and saw a bank account. They saw a quiet, compliant woman they could push around and exploit. They never realized I was acquiring the very ground they walked on. They thought they could use my wealth to build their own lazy kingdom, but instead they handed me the exact tools I needed to conquer them completely. I look at my children now and I know their future is untouchable. They will grow up knowing the value of hard work, the importance of absolute integrity, and the sheer unstoppable power of walking away from people who do not serve your highest good. Sometimes you have to let the table flip over so you can build a stronger one from scratch. If you are watching this, and you are dealing with family members who drain your energy, demand your resources, and disrespect your boundaries, let this be your ultimate sign to stop playing their game. You do not owe your life to people who only love what they can extract from you. Protect your peace, secure your assets, and never be afraid to evict the toxic energy from your life. Thank you for following my journey to the end. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more stories about claiming your power and building your empire. Stay strong, stay focused, and always remember your true worth. Blood does not always mean family, and shared genetics should never be an excuse to endure toxic abuse or financial exploitation. The ultimate lesson from this journey is that true family is a deliberate choice, built on mutual respect, safety, and unconditional support, rather than manipulation and greed. When those closest to you try to tear down your empire, you must find the courage to walk away and protect your peace. You have the power to break generational curses and build your own secure sanctuary. If you have ever survived toxic family dynamics, share your story below and subscribe today.